like and follow if you love horror. I think I'm going to start going live every Tuesday or Wednesday. I haven't picked the actual day yet, but it's going to be either Tuesday or Wednesday. Alright, where was I? In the chaos, a stray bullet tagged Sheriff Clintock in the bicep, while another tagged Bronson in the head. Bronson dropped Robert, gripped his forehead as his eyes rolled back, and struggled to remain standing. Patty cried out. Both she and George fought to hold Bronson up and pull him away from the gunfire. Finally, their group was in the hallway before the stairs. The sheriff closed the door behind them and started ushering them towards the top. Patty and George struggled to carry Bronson, who seemed to jerk slightly. The pace was badly staggered by George's natural limp. The stairs led them to a second floor with two offices. Patty and George rested Bronson off to the side and began working quickly to settle him so they could look him over. Within mere seconds, he jerked violently and inhaled his last breath. Patty leaned into George, practically collapsing. She clung to her brother with a fierce iron grip. She shook violently for a second. No one could guess what happened next. There's never a logical reaction when a loved one is murdered. George hugged her close, and she shook more. After a few labored breaths, she wiped away a stream of tears. "Everybody in my office." Robert kept his voice down, not that he had to. They could still hear gunfire from below. "I got another rifle and a handgun with some ammo." George pulled Patty up to guide her along. She was practically guiding him too. Bronson was his best friend. He never felt so helpless in his life and struggled to think. He stared blankly ahead of them, a tear making its way down his face as well. There just wasn't time to process what happened. There was that shadow and that stinger, and Bronson turned on them violently. They kept low, out of sight of the windows, and quickly congregated in Robert's office. He pulled out a Remington Model 700 30-06 with scope and handed it to George, then handed Patty a Ruger GP 100 .357 revolver. He only had a box of ammo each, but that was more than enough. Sheriff Clintock checked the magazine in his Pilford 30-30. It was empty. He pulled up his old Roscoe and threw the rifle aside. Robert checked his borrowed shotgun, a Mossberg 500, likely from a dead deputy. There was a shell in it, but no way to tell how many more. He thumbed the shell deep against the loading spring. 3 shells, maybe 2. He'd have to make them count. Ugh. Sorry about that. "Okay, now what?" Sheriff Clintock whispered as he worked to tear off his bloody sleeve. "First, let me take a look at that." Patty sounded exhausted, but she was coherent and focused. She quickly examined the wound. "Looks like the bullet went right through, but it's bleeding pretty bad. We'll need pressure. Good thing you're not a southpaw." There was no cloth or bandages available, only Old Glory, which she unceremoniously ripped strips off of. "Alright, so that's that. How the fuck do we get out of here, and where the fuck do we go?" Robert, half-eyed ease, clearly wasn't coming back anytime soon. "Station," Sheriff Clintock suggested, biting through the pain as Patty wrapped his arm up. "It ain't far, and we need to call the cavalry. Plus, there's more guns and ammunition." "Well, there's the second part of that question answered." George darted a quick peek over the ledge of the window, which faced out into the street. The building was surrounded by individuals with guns. He recognized a few faces from the missing persons poster. One was Carlos. Beyond the familiar faces, just out of the street light and the shadows, more of those figures in the telltale glisten of light off of eye clusters. "Whatever those fucking things are, they don't much care for light." "Okay, there's that," Robert added, nodding dumbly. "What the fuck was that thing?" "Unfriendly and clearly allergic to bullets," George said dismissively. "How do we get around them is more important." "Fire escape in the next office back," Robert suggested. The gunfire stopped. There was a tense moment for everyone in the group. "No time like the present." Sheriff shook his head and crept towards the office door. I'll take point. They made their way as quietly as possible towards the back office. They could hear movement downstairs and knew it wouldn't be long before people started working their way up. George took the opportunity to dart another look out the back window by the stairs. 3 men with guns. Not enough light to identify the telltale glisten. He then slipped into the back office with the rest. They were already prepared to head out the fire escape. 3 on the back door. George gestured in the general vicinity of where they'd be standing, just beyond the fire escape. Everyone nodded, and the sheriff pulled open the window. He crept out onto the metal grating and carefully leaned over the edge to see the 3 men below. He motioned for the rest to follow, then leaned on the railing again to steady his aim. He pointed at each man, then at one of the groups. He pointed at each man, then at one of the groups respectively. Each joined him in taking aim. Lo, he held out 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, then they fired. All 3 men fell, and the group began rushing down the stairs. Sheriff, watch the door, Patty commanded with a low growl. George, Robert, find us a path into the mountains. Patty and Eckel took up each side of the back door and waited for people to start pouring out. Robert swept up a rifle from the fallen men. George began to shoot at any shadow that so much as flickered in the woods. Cover me when I go to reload. The mag only takes 5, George yelled to Robert, sweeping his aim across the tree line. Patty and the sheriff backed slowly away from the door, fingers tense over triggers. The door swung open, and without hesitation or even aiming, they both squeezed, emptying a few rounds into the doorway. This seemed to dissuade anyone else from exiting. The group took to the hills, making sure they stayed by George, who everyone assumed was the weakest runner. However, he was surprisingly swift for a man with a bum leg when properly motivated. The heftier sheriff had the hardest time keeping up. Eckel, I'd like to have a conversation with that son of yours, Robert stated flatly. So would I, Sheriff Clintock said between gasps of breath. They skirted the edge of town. Before they knew it, dozens were roaming the area with guns and flashlights. Even 2 county sheriff cruisers swept up and down the streets with their spot lamps. Sheriff Clintock caught a glimpse of one of the deputies. It was one that had previously been fighting alongside not 5 damn minutes ago. We might have a problem. The sheriff stopped to catch his breath. Fuck's sake. George fell back to his side. The other 2 took up positions, weapons pointed in all directions. One of my deputies. He's been... Eckel shook his head, trying to figure out what to say. Compromised. We can't go to the station if more have been. It's easily defensible, and they'll control all that firepower. We need a new plan. We hit the trails, get down to the lake, cross into Kodiak Preserve. It's dark, no moon, heavy overcast, no one will see us, George suggested. We raid every cabin for weapons and see about getting us some sleds. No point in sticking around. The town is lost, Patty added. George peered down into the town streets with his scope. He saw a line of townsfolk, men and women alike, lined up, heading towards a dark alley. The first one in line was someone from the town hall. He'd previously been with them, shoulder to shoulder, when trying to repel the other invaders. Yet there he was, standing in a line with the rest of the townsfolk, like he'd been complicit in all of it. George, we gotta go, Patty said under her breath. Hold on, something's up. George waved her on and continued watching. Something wasn't right, but soon the fellow turned as a stinger stretched out from the shadows behind him. It quickly plunged into the base of his skull. He didn't even flinch. In seconds he began to shake, then seize. Then his head and jaw twisted uncontrollably. He flopped over and past the others, making it impossible to see what was happening through the scope. Come on! Patty bit down on her words as best she could, but she could see the flashlights drawing near, and they knew they'd be spotted if they stayed. Again, the group was up and running. The deep snow was no help.